So thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Gilles Patry, and I'm delighted to welcome all of you to this webinar on the CFI Strategic Roadmap. First of all, again, let me apologize to those who had registered for yesterday's webinar. As I said, a power failure at the service provider's server site forced us to cancel the webinar. We did conduct the French webinar, and that went very well. We should have about 70 connection points and a few hundred participants potentially on this call. Please note that, as I said, there is a technician online who's available to help you, or you can call him at 866-843-4848 extension 1. You can also use the chat box, as some of you have been doing, in order to get some information. I'll turn off the webcam so as not to cause a distraction from the slides, and also to minimize the usage of the bandwidth. And we will start first of all with the outline of the seminar or the webinar this afternoon. First of all, following a brief introduction on the VIA interface and on how the webinar will be conducted, we'll move right into the core of the subject. I'll start by providing a bit of background material that is rather important, and we will spend a few minutes on this. I'll then describe the framework that let me just get my laser pointer, describe the framework that we have used in order to create the strategic plan or the strategic roadmap. Then we'll spend some time on our mandate, but focus our attention mostly on our strategic directions, and this is the core of the presentation. We'll talk a little bit on how this strategic roadmap, this strategic plan, will be supported by the assets that we have, and then I'll try to answer questions via the chat window, or answer your questions that you will be submitting via the chat window, and I'll come back to that in a second, and we'll do that at the end. And I've figured that we could probably spend 15 to 20 minutes on the questions and the questions and answer period. So let's get right into it, and I should also mention that the presentation will be recorded. The recording will be available for review on the CFI website in about a week or so, and we'll send you an email when it becomes available. So let's have a quick look at the VIA interface. In the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see a number of icons. The first one is how to download. You click on this icon to download the documents, and that will be very useful to you. You can download them throughout the presentation or after. We've figured that the link is going to stay open for about half an hour, and you can download them during that time also. There's also a notebook that you can use to note any questions that you might have, and then do a copy and paste at the end. But the most important one is the zoom button on the bottom right hand corner to increase the size of the slide should it be too small on your screen. Then there is the left-hand panel where you've got the personal options that are where the personal options are located. You'll see that we have deactivated the microphone and the webcam on your computers, so because of the number of participants that we have on the line. And here's the chat window that you can use to ask questions as we go along, and we'll have somebody, my executive assistant, will be collecting these questions, and at the end of the webinar they will be brought to me, and then I can try to answer as many questions as possible. So please use that chat window to essentially ask the questions related to the strategic roadmap, if you have any. We've scheduled about 60 minutes, 40 to 45 minutes of presentation, 15 to 20 minutes of discussion. Again, we've talked about the questions that you'll be submitting. The material can be downloaded from this site now, or it can be downloaded from the CFI website at a later date, and the video will be presented on our site a little bit later. So If we look at the, start with a little bit of background information. As you know, the Canada Foundation for Innovation is celebrating this year its 15th anniversary. We were created by the Government of Canada to build our nation's capacity to undertake world-class research and technology development that benefits Canadians. And the CFI, as you well know, fulfills this mandate by investing in research infrastructure that is necessary for Canada's leading researchers to discover, to develop, and to apply new knowledge. And in essence, we cover all areas of science, health, engineering, the environment, and also the humanities. Our mandate is very clear and very important, and this is our contractual mandate that we have with the Government of Canada. And I thought it was important for you to really have a look at this contract that we have. So there's a clause in our contract that says that the mandate of CFI, our funding agreement, stipulates that our mandate is to, and I quote, enhance the capacity of recipients to, number one, attract and retain the world's top research talent. Number two, enable researchers to undertake world-class research and technology development that leads to social, economic, and environmental benefits to Canada, for Canadians. Number three, and this is an important one, support private sector innovation and commercialization. This is now in our 2010 funding agreement with the Government of Canada. And this is an enhanced statement of our obligations. And then the last one is to train the next generation of researchers. So I thought it was important for you to be cognizant of our contract with the Government of Canada as part of our 2010 funding agreement. The various evaluations, consultations, stakeholder surveys that we've conducted over the past few years clearly indicate that the CFI is playing a fundamentally important role in supporting Canada's research enterprise. Nevertheless, to continue delivering its mandate effectively, the CFI must evolve to meet today's challenges. And there are a couple of questions that we're asking ourselves and that people are asking of us all the time. And the first one is, how can CFI be more strategic, number one? And number two, how can our investments in research infrastructure contribute more effectively to economic growth? And remember again the contract that we have again with the Government of Canada. It's important at this stage to talk about the research landscape in Canada and the shifts that are taking place and that we have to respond to. And we'll do this by looking at this diagram, the evolving research environment. When I've already pointed out to one of the clarification of our mandate a second ago in connection with the private sector innovation commercializations, but there are other forces in play that obviously will influence the policies and programs that CFI will have. And I'll try to paint a rapid picture of these. The suite of programs and the strategic directions that CFI will take in the future are intended, in effect, to respond to the shifts that we see in the Canadian research landscape and in the broader social and economic environment in which we all live. These shifts represent changes, emerging and established, that will require the CFI to evolve and adapt some of its programs, its policies, its processes and practices in order to continue to have a transformative impact on the Canadian research and innovation ecosystem. Sometimes it's not so much a question of shifts, but a question of balance, and this is what I've tried to convey here. And this is, we'll cover a number of elements here. First of all, the balance between open and strategic. CFI funds, as you all know, have always been designed with lots of flexibility to allow institutions to realize their aspirations and objectives with a singular focus on excellence. Few funds have been targeted or strategic in nature. Strategic coordination of funding opportunities from various programs and agencies has not been the norm, and yet it is clear that many synergies are possible. So this suggests that it may be desirable to coordinate some of our research funding activities with a view to developing better alignment and strategic funding partnerships with the granting councils and other funding agencies. The next one is going from the individual to the collective. You know, a clear path to reaping the full benefits of CFI investment lies in projects that bring together multiple partners, institutions, and sectors. Engaging partners that have both a stake in the research and an interest in the outcomes enabled by CFI projects is a desirable way to serve the collective and increase the impact of our investments. Striking a balance between projects that serve the needs of an individual researcher or research group or an institution, and projects that serve the needs of a group of institution, the broader community, is something that we should probably try to explore. The next one is going from projects to portfolios. You know, with more than 7,400 projects funded to date and $12 to $13 billion invested in the research infrastructure since 1997, the CFI and its partners, the provinces and the private sector and the institutions, it is really time for us to reflect on the way the CFI and the institution manage their CFI projects. Managing individual CFI projects without consideration to the sum total of the investments at a given institution may lead to less than optimal decision making in sustaining and building on CFI investments. So a portfolio approach might help optimize decisions on investing, sustaining and reinvesting, as well as decommissioning some of the CFI projects. The next one is going to talk about, you know, infrastructure deficit to infrastructure gap. The research infrastructure deficit of the 1990s, for those that were around at that time, has been largely addressed by the significant investments made by the CFI since 1997. Yet an infrastructure gap remains, in part due to the growth in the system. You know, the system has grown tremendously. Between 2000 and 2010, we've doubled the number of graduate students, for example, in universities, and the college system has also grown very significantly during the same period. And it's also associated with the complexity of research, the rising costs of the research activities, and technological advances. So while CFI investments are still required, the nature and the extent of these investments is evolving, given the profound transformation over the past decade in Canada's post-secondary research environment. Then going from partners to partnership, and this one is also very important. And we have to face it, the private sector participation in CFI projects has been mostly transactional in nature, seeking to do business with the institutions by providing and selling them goods and services in exchange for vendor discounts with the CFI, which CFI recognizes as a legitimate partner contribution. Now it's time, we feel, to encourage more meaningful partnerships with the private sector and others, those that engage and involve partners interested in the outcomes and the results of CFI projects. The goal is really to move from a push to a pull model of knowledge translation and exchange. Then we'll move into going from knowledge creation to knowledge translation, and we've made reference to this already. You know, universities in general have played a most critical role in the generation of new knowledge over the centuries. We also need to emphasize, however, how best to use this new knowledge coming from universities and now colleges also, to ensure that we reap the full benefits of CFI investments for all Canadians. The next element that is essentially generating a certain shift in the environment, research environment landscape, is essentially we've gone from a planning to grow to planning for growth model. And let me explain this. You know, with the creation of the CFI, many institutions saw an opportunity to grow at an unprecedented rate, and that was great. But growth was the objective. In today's economic realities and the pace of growth now that will be slowing tremendously, we feel, better planning and decision making on which priority areas will continue to grow are required. So it is much more focusing on the planning side of things as opposed to just the growth element. Going from implementers to stewards. Over the past 15 years, institutions have focused their energies on building their portfolio of CFI projects, one project at a time. And today, institutions have a greater dual responsibility to actively manage and sustain their past CFI investments, as well as continue to implement new ones. And then going from university innovation to innovation. Since its inception, the CFI has served universities very well. Innovation in the university environment, which is generally long-term, upstream, and disruptive, represents only a portion of the broad spectrum of innovation that occurs in other organizations and sectors. The question for CFI is, how can we best support innovation across the full spectrum, from discovery to innovation to enterprise, involving universities, colleges, and other partners and stakeholders? And finally, going from institutional projects to larger community projects. CFI projects have been primarily focused and anchored within universities and now within colleges, with limited involvement beyond the academic sector. In order to reap the full benefits of innovation, some CFI projects must expand beyond the academic walls, involving and engaging partners from the broader community. So these are some of the considerations that have influenced us, and I must say have influenced the board of directors of CFI in identifying our strategic directions in the years to come. One thing is clear, is that you can't do world-class research without access to state-of-the-art research tools, equipment, and facilities. Research infrastructure is the cornerstone of research and innovation. And obviously CFI is playing a very critical role in supporting research infrastructure across the country right now. The purpose of our strategic roadmap is really to chart this evolution by identifying areas where there needs to be changes in approach and application. And in general, these fall in three categories that I've highlighted in this slide. The first one is applying the principle of excellence across a broader spectrum of infrastructure funding. The expansion of areas of funding to include major science initiatives and colleges working with industry offers the CFI the opportunity to apply the lens of excellence now to a broader range of research capacity and research capacity building activities. The second element is that supporting the full spectrum of research from discovery to innovation. Again, remember the contract that we have with the Government of Canada as part of our 2010 funding agreement. In order to enhance the integration of research infrastructure into Canada's innovation system, the CFI needs to design programs and policies to support the full continuum of research activities, from the most fundamental research to the applied research activities. And finally, working together to consult, coordinate, collaborate, and communicate. One of the real strengths of the CFI is its consultative approach to designing and delivering its programs. Stakeholders across the board place great value in this characteristic because it ensures that the CFI remains responsive, transparent, and accountable. And when I talk about stakeholders, it's not only the institutions, the universities, the colleges, and the research hospitals, but also the provinces, which are a key partner of the CFI in identifying the research that needs to be funded, but also in supporting the research activities by providing a significant portion of the funds. So what we've done is that we've developed a framework that has guided our efforts to develop this strategic roadmap. And in essence, that framework is based on very traditional steps in the development of a strategic plan. First, identifying our vision, and we say here that the vision for CFI is that Canada's researchers lead the world in contributing to competitiveness, prosperity, and quality of life. That's the ultimate goal. Our mandate is to enhance world-class research, world-class talent, and world-class innovation. And this goes back to the contract that I've highlighted right at the beginning of the presentation with the Government of Canada. Even though there are 3 elements here and 4 in the contract, you'll see that they fit very nicely because world-class talent implies both faculty members and also the students that we train in our universities and colleges. And then the key, the important element of our strategic plan is our are the strategic directions that we've identified. And here there are 6 strategic directions, 4 of which are of direct concern to you. The first one is to invest in the highest level of excellence. Number 2, to sustain and enhance Canada's research capacity. Number 3, forge productive partnerships. Then build global influence, the international character. And then establish a trusted voice and track the impacts of our investments. And then finally, we have our valued assets. And this represents essentially the 3 basic elements of any corporation. One is having a modern governance and organizational structure, a rigorous decision-making process and accountability framework, and then benefiting from a highly skilled workforce and resources. So this is in effect the strategic plan, and then what we're going to do is try to look inside each of these boxes as we go along in the next 20 minutes or so. So our mandate very rapidly is to focus on world-class research, developing world-class talent, both graduate students, undergraduate students, as well as faculty members, and then world-class innovation. How do we bring ideas to market, and how do we foster this third element of our contract with the Government of Canada, which focuses on innovation and commercialization? So in world-class research, we all know that a high-performing national research and innovation system depends on a strong pool of highly qualified individual, research excellence, public and private institutions that create value for research and technology development, systematic mechanisms for knowledge translation and application, and successful commercialization of innovative products and services by the private sector. You know, while we can pride ourselves that we've in effect reversed the brain drain of the 1990s, I always say that the situation remains fragile and that we must guard against complacency, because obviously faculty members, researchers enjoy great mobility. And if we want to foster a climate of excellence, we need to be able to not only attract the best researchers in the world, but also maintain them, retain them in our institutions. So our goal here under this heading is to ensure that Canada's best researchers have access to the infrastructure necessary to conduct world-class research across all disciplines, from discovery to innovation. And that aspect, again, is going to come over and over throughout the presentation and throughout the document. And that's an important aspect because, again, that's part of our contract. The second element of our mandate is world-class talent. You know, the bottom line is that it's all about people. It's about, you know, providing the best researchers with the tools, equipment, and facilities they need to do world-class research and train the best individuals in the world. It's really people who innovate, not organizations. So our focus is on talent. So our goal then is to ensure that Canada's institutions attract and retain the best talent from around the world and provide a vibrant environment to train the next generation of researchers and innovators. Our third element of our mandate is to foster world-class innovation. How can CFI play its role in bolstering Canada's capacity for innovation? You know, CFI investments can play a vital role in meeting this challenge by providing researchers with the tools they require to generate new knowledge. And I've highlighted here a quote from Herman Hauser that says that the leisurely translation of scientific discoveries into new industries has really been replaced by a race between nations to take advantage of these discoveries and translate them into economic success stories. And this is truer than ever right now. I mean, this was said about a year or 2 years ago. There is a race out there to obviously compete in order to take ideas and bring them to market. So it's not that we are now, I'm not saying that we're changing the mandate of CFI to focus solely on innovation, not at all, but we have to consider that aspect of our mission and of our mandate. You know, countries are fostering greater public-private sector interaction by really facilitating and supporting access to university researchers and infrastructure. And there's an opportunity here for Canada and for CFI to foster this university, college, private sector collaboration. How do we foster this greater linkages between our institutions and the private sector? So for this particular activity, our goal is to ensure that universities, colleges, and research hospitals use their research infrastructure to support innovation in partnership with innovators in every sector of society. So if we move now to our strategic directions, you will recall the 6 elements of our strategic directions that we've highlighted previously. We'll focus on each and every one of those one at a time. So the first one is investing in the highest level of excellence. If our goal is to foster world-class research, research excellence then must guide all CFI activities. And that's been the norm since the very beginning of CFI. Our focus has always been at identifying the best research projects, the ones that had the most potential, with a clear focus on excellence. So research excellence will ensure that, number one, we support the best researchers across the country, and that we maximize the results of our investments. Our focus on excellence will cover the full spectrum of research activities, from upstream fundamental research to downstream applied research. Innovation activities can take place along this continuum, as we all know. So in order to do this, our goal is to ensure that Canadian researchers and the innovators with whom they interact perform at the highest level of excellence. And we'll do this by, number one, applying the lens of excellence to the full spectrum of all research and technology development activities, including innovation. It's in essence broadening the aperture, increasing the aperture of our lens here to cover the full spectrum. The second point is fostering collaboration and partnerships between people, disciplines, institutions, and sectors. And you will see this coming up over and over in the document and in this presentation. The idea is to try to get the best researchers, the best institutions to interact together so that we can maximize the benefits of our investments. The third point is to support world-class facilities operating at the highest level of excellence, and then strengthening dialogue with provinces, institutions, and the private sector to identify and address the research needs of the nation. We have to be may identify priorities. And this, again, has been the trademark of CFI since the very beginning. The strategic research plans of, yes, the institutions, but also of the provinces must be aligned with the investments that are being made by the provinces and by the Canada Foundation for Innovation. And then investing in a balanced portfolio of really exceptional infrastructure projects supporting discovery through innovation. The next one is to sustain and enhance the capacity of Canada's research enterprise. The emphasis here is on sustainability. We've invested well over $12 billion in research infrastructure from the very beginning, and now some of that infrastructure needs to be maintained, needs to be enhanced, and this has been the focus of this latest series of investments that we've had through the 2009 federal budget, where about 55% of the budget is devoted to sustainability of research infrastructure. It's an important element of the CFI review process. But sustainability is necessary, but it's not sufficient. We also need to invest in new infrastructure because a gap still exists, and this gap is associated to the growth in the system, as I've identified previously, but also the unmet needs. The needs were so great, and there's still a series of unmet needs within institutions, and so we have to sustain the research infrastructure, but also enhance the research capacity of our establishments. And then finally, we need to address the issues of management and operation associated with regional and national facilities. And that's an important aspect of the CFI mandate, particularly as part of the 2009 federal budget, where we are starting to look at these facilities, unique facilities that service the needs of the entire research community across the country. So the way that we are planning to do this, our goal is to ensure that Canada's research enterprise is sustainable and has the capacity to perform at world-class level. And we'll try to do this by, number one, engaging stakeholders to develop an appropriate and effective and stable framework for sustaining and enhancing Canada's top-performing research facilities, collaborate with the Government of Canada to develop a strategy for the creation, management, and sustainability of national large-scale research infrastructures, including both CFI and non-CFI funded facilities. Eventually, this needs to be addressed globally. Investing in both existing and emerging areas of research, requiring institutions to develop comprehensive sustainability plans for CFI-funded infrastructure. And this is an important point to stress, because every time we get a proposal from an establishment, a university or a college or a research hospital, you're asked to present us with a business plan on the sustainability of that facility. And the presidents of the universities and the vice president of research sign on the dotted line saying that they have a plan. And then a few months later, they show up to the government and or to CFI saying, well, they may not have the resources that they thought that they had. And so that is really an issue that we need to address. And finally, addressing the infrastructure gap that remains due to growth and unmet needs and also emerging needs. The third element is forging productive research and organizational partnerships. Here we're talking about these two types of partnerships, partnerships in which research partnerships to support world-class research, because we know that world-class research is a community activity. It involves the collaboration and partnerships between the best researchers and institutions around the world, and the concept of core facilities, that is so that we don't duplicate facilities, is also very important in maximizing the benefits and the impact of our investments. So again, research partnerships will drive that element. And then the second point is organizational partnerships. While CFI is unique in many, many ways, our role and our mandate is linked to those of the granting councils. And so there are many opportunities for us to align our strategies and to partner in several projects and programs that we can talk about more specifically later. So our goal is to ensure that, where appropriate, CFI investments in infrastructure achieve the maximum impact through partnerships. And we will try to do this by fostering partnerships in support of research and innovation. This is not new. I want to mention that this was part of the original funding agreement at CFI, that CFI infrastructure and our guidelines foster collaboration amongst institutions, but I just wanted to mention that. The second point is targeting investments to infrastructure projects that support intersectoral and international collaboration from discovery to innovation. And that international component is also very important. The third point is designing policies and processes that encourage interinstitutional planning and intersectoral collaboration. And we have to make sure that we provide the support to facilitate this collaboration amongst institutions and between sectors. And then finally, not finally, but investing in facilities that cluster institutions and industry. And then finally, forming organizational partnerships that increase the effectiveness of the CFI in meeting its mandate. So those are the first three elements. And the fourth one is the fourth element that deals with the programmatic aspect of the activities of CFI, and it's building global influence. You know, because of our size and the reputation of our researchers and the quality of our institutions, Canadian researchers do very, very well internationally. With only 2.8% of the population, we generate close to 5% of the OECD research publication output. However, and this we state clearly in our document, Canada is not seen as a major player on the international research scene. We rarely figure in strategic research initiatives of key countries such as the the US, the UK, Australia, Japan. You know, the word Canada is rarely mentioned, if at all. You know, we may appear in a table, but certainly not as a major player and a major partner. So we need to try and change that. So Canada needs to maximize its influence really in the global research space and try to generate initiatives that will foster that. Our goal then is to ensure that Canadian researchers have access to the infrastructure necessary to make important and influential contributions to the global research enterprise. And we'll try to do this by, number one, investing in infrastructure that support international research collaboration. Number two, investing in facilities that enable Canadian researchers to contribute to addressing global challenges. Number three, incorporating international dimensions into programs that support innovation and university-industry partnerships. Number four, ensuring that infrastructure is accessible so that it can be used by industry to increase their global competitiveness. And this is a question we get all the time. Can industry have access to the facilities funded by CFI? And the answer to that is, why not? Particularly if it provides this interaction between the private sector, the business sector, and the researchers, and that enhances this collaboration. So there is nothing preventing these facilities to be shared with the private sector. Obviously, we need to consider the needs of the researchers for which this facility was built in the first place, but opening access to these facilities to the private sector is certainly part of the mandate of the CFI. And then promoting international access to unique Canadian research infrastructure. That's also a part of the ways that we want to achieve this goal. The next two strategic directions in this block are mostly administrative, but are important for you also to understand, is that we want to make sure that CFI is seen as a trusted voice in research and innovation, policy and communications. You know, we need to play a role as a voice for research and innovation policy in Canada, and that's going to be a major efforts are going to be targeted in this direction. And our goal then is to ensure that CFI contributes to national policy discussions on science and technology, and Canadians understand the value of research and innovation. And we'll try to do this by building capacity for policy analysis and position CFI as a thought leader on research, innovation, and infrastructure issues, number one. Number two, we'll try to position the CFI as a leader in social media communications, media relations, and community engagement, and nurture a culture of communication among stakeholders and within the organization. And this includes, obviously, the universities and the colleges also. The final in this, in our strategic direction is to assess and communicate the impacts of our investments in research and infrastructure. And if there is one point that has been driven home to me since I've joined CFI a little over a year and a half ago, is I'm being asked, all the time by the members of the federal government and the public service, we've invested $13 billion now in research infrastructure across the country. What do we have to show for? And how do we measure the impact of what has been done? And so it's important to identify the role played by research infrastructure in contributing to Canada's innovation system and the value for money for the Canadian taxpayer. I know that for a researcher that may not be front and center, but it is critical for us if we are to secure additional funds. So we want to work more collaboratively with the institutions and with the provinces in order to ensure that we identify the impacts that have been generated through CFI investments. How do we assess and measure the impact? Well, that's the $64,000 question, I guess now $64 million question. Ultimately, it's the quality of life of Canadians that we're trying to enhance, as we identified in our vision. However, we need to be a little bit more realistic, and STIC is, in its latest report, has broadened and refined the indicators of science and technology around the three themes of talent, R&D, and innovation. In fact, CFI has been a leader in many ways in this area through the OMS studies, the outcome measurement studies, and also we've got an ongoing study on the socioeconomic impact, on a socioeconomic impact assessment. And these two studies, these two ways, the OMS and the socioeconomic impact assessment, I think are very, very promising tools that we're hoping to continue to use and develop. And so we're going to try to achieve our goal as it connects to measuring the impacts by identifying the metrics and the indicators that accurately reflect the socioeconomic impact of research and that can be used to develop a narrative demonstrating the value of CFI investments. Then tracking outcomes to ensure effective program design and implementation and policy development. Enhancing organizational capacity to mine and analyze information in our databases, and then nurture a culture of communication within the organization and across organizations. So that's our strategic directions. But all of this, whether it's the mandate and the strategic direction, relies on or needs a foundation, and the foundation is really our assets and what we call our valued assets. And everything rests on having a modern and effective governance structure and organizational excellence. And then the second element that is also critical is to have a rigorous decision-making and accountability system. And finally, having access to a highly skilled human resources pool. And this is within the CFI environment. I won't go into details into each and every one of those elements. We've elaborated a little bit more in our document because it essentially I thought that you'd be more interested on the programmatic side of things this afternoon, and but if you are interested in what we're thinking of doing in that direction, please have a look at our strategic roadmap. So what are the next steps? And this is again very, very important. First of all, we want to receive your feedback, and you should try to send us your feedback no later than February 16th on the strategic roadmap and the directions that CFI is taking. Bear in mind, again, the mandate of CFI and the obligations that we have. This is non-negotiable. That's part of what we've been asked to deliver. And so go back to the first slides that I've presented right at the beginning. We will report to the board on the feedback that we've received, make the adjustments necessary, if not to the document itself, certainly to the implementation of the strategic roadmap, because what we're trying to do now is to develop an operational plan, because what I've described could be thought of as a 20 to 30,000 foot level perspective. What we now have to do is to operationalize this plan and to try to develop really concrete elements on how we will be delivering on what we've promised in this document. And then develop a scorecard to measure our progress and to report on our progress. And this is one thing that the board is very interested in, and also our key funders, the Government of Canada, and I'm sure also the provinces want to know if CFI and if their investments are achieving the goals that they have identified. However, it's important to remember that our plan hinges on securing funding for CFI, and I can tell you that we are working very, very actively at identifying additional sources of funding in the coming years. It is gratifying to read some of the directions that the Prime Minister has identified as part of his Economic Action Plan 2012. You must have read in the news that he's identified 6 key elements to his Economic Action Plan for 2012. And the second one is investing in research and development so that new technologies translate into jobs for Canadians and opportunities for Canadian entrepreneurs. And this is verbatim from his note to his caucus. So there is an opportunity that lies ahead, we hope, for CFI and for the institutions. So we've now have about 15 minutes left for questions and answer, and hopefully some of my colleagues will have collated all of these questions, and if you do have questions that you want to pose, please feel free to use the chat window in the bottom right, in the bottom corner of the screen. So I don't know if there are any questions. I hope you were able to hear what I had to say, and feel free to ask any questions you have. If not, I could go on and talk some more. Will we get a copy of the presentation, or is it included in the downloadable materials? It is in the, if you download the material that I have put on the website, and this site is going to be open for another half hour, you'll be able to get a copy of the presentation, and you'll that has all the slides in that PDF file. We will also be putting the same material up on the CFI website along with a copy of this presentation. So what level of industry involvement partnership is expected at the application phase? Well, that's a tough question. It's, it depends on the programs. Essentially what we're looking at is, in the programs that we will be offering and the guidelines that we will be using, we're trying to identify how do we foster, through research infrastructure investment, how do we foster this translation from ideas to innovation to partnerships with industry. And I would encourage you to reread the document where we really talk about having, involving key stakeholders in the projects, not just people that provide a discount, which is very exciting and very important, obviously, in order to help you acquire the infrastructure that you need, but also partners that are interested in the research, that also want to use the results of the research so that it can also be translated into economic benefits, into products and services, and so on. So that's an important aspect. It's not necessarily just to say, well, we're now moving, and I don't want to give the impression to those that are on the line that CFI is moving totally. It's, as I said, it's a question of balance. It's a question of trying to address that issue. Is how can, CFI will continue to invest in basic research and upstream research. That's fundamental, that is key. But we also need to address that other element of our mandate, which is to how do we foster, through our investments in infrastructure, how do we foster innovation more directly? Then there's a question here, are guidelines available for use of CFI funded infrastructure by the private sector and other partners and for clinical use? We leave it up to the institutions. There was a feeling, and I had this in several of my meetings with researchers, that a CFI-funded piece of equipment was for the exclusive use of the universities or the colleges. That is not, that's not really the case. The idea is that these facilities, particularly if there is availability on the use of these facilities, can be made available to all of our stakeholders. Obviously, it doesn't mean that they have to be made available for free, and that allows many of the institutions, and I've visited many of you, that obviously have a cost recovery system to share the use of these facilities, but to try to foster this partnership between industry and the institutions. There's another question on, with respect to the CFI consultative approach, does CFI assist institutions through network building and strategic interaction? Well, we do have a group from our communications group, and I would encourage you to get in touch with Pierre Normand, the Vice President of Communications. We're always very interested in developing those relationships and helping you develop those relationships also. So that's also very important. Then there's another question, is the funding emphasis on research, is the funding emphasis on research that produces short-term results? No, I don't want to give that impression that we are now, and I hope that this is not what's come out of this presentation. It's a question of balance. Go back to those slides that I've used. It's a question of identifying a proper portfolio of investments, and we're not saying that we're only going to focus on applied research or short-term results. Not at all. The mandate of CFI continues to be a broad-based mandate in terms of fostering discovery-based research activities, but also expanding it to cover, widening our lens, as we've said many times during the course of this presentation, widening the lens to include the more applied side of the innovation system. Then there is a question, are you expecting stronger sustainability plans from institutions, and will CFI invest greater resources in the infrastructure operating fund? Well, that's a very interesting question. I think yes, we are we going to be asking for stronger sustainability plan, business plans? The answer is yes there in many ways, in that we want to make sure that the business plan that is presented is not simply you filling in the blanks in a sheet of paper to say, we've got the money and we've got the ideas on how to sustain that investment in the future. We have seen in the past, plans that have been submitted in a way that we say here, we'll build it and they will come. Well, much of it sometimes does not translate the way that institutions would like to see it. So we need to make sure that, because the resources are more limited, we need to make sure that there is a sustainability plan that doesn't solely rely on investments from the CFI. And the second part of that question was, will CFI invest greater resources into infrastructure operating fund? Well, we're going to be looking at that in the sense that our IOF funds are one-time 30% allocation to foster the startup of the facilities and the costs associated with bringing a facility into operation. We'll be, and I'd be curious to get your suggestions as to how we should be looking at the IOF funds. Some of my colleagues tell me that maybe we should have a sliding scale. Maybe it should be variable. Maybe we have to look at the needs, et cetera, et cetera. We're looking for feedback from you as to your suggestions into the IOF. Particularly if we're looking at bringing together a larger number of institutions to work together. We realize that there are additional costs associated with large partnerships and central facilities, and so again, we'd be curious to hear what the establishments have to say about that. Another question is, will all projects offered through all the new programs require private sector involvement? Well, our funding formula is usually 40-60, and it's been traditionally 40% from CFI, 40% from provinces, and then 20% from either the private sector and or the institution. Much of the private sector contribution has been in kind. We're obviously looking at the in-kind elements. Many of your financial officers have been chatting with the CFI staff about in-kind contribution, and we will be examining that aspect over the coming months. In effect, we would like to see more involvement from the private sector, and obviously more financial contributions from them. But I don't want to venture here into a direction that we have not yet identified. Again, we are looking for suggestions, and sometimes an in-kind contribution, if it's the time of individuals, is just as valuable as a cash contribution, and I'm the first one to recognize that, and so we want to maintain some flexibility. But if there's one message that I'd like to leave, is that when we're talking about that involvement, is to make sure that the quality of the partnerships is enhanced, because I think in many ways the transactional nature of the partnerships right now, having partners as opposed to true partnerships, is what we have been faced with in the past. What we would like to see is a shift, if you allow me the expression, a shift towards true partnerships with the various institutions. Then there's another question: will CFI actively coordinate with other funding agencies to enable opportunities for complementary operational funding? Well, we can certainly do this, and we do this as part of our discussions with the provinces, and we'd certainly be willing to assist in any way we can. I know we've been involved in those types of activities in some of the projects. I've been going across the country, particularly for the MSI projects, talking to the provincial counterparts to try to identify their interests in sustaining some of these major facilities. There's also another question: will the new program offering continue to include allocation-based funding? Well, the allocation-based funding is only, well, I guess there are two elements to it. One is on the Leaders Opportunity Fund, where there is an allocation-based formula. And it's also on the envelopes that we give when we do a Leading Edge Fund, New Initiative Fund allocation. The one thing we have to be careful in terms of allocation is that with a focus, we want to make sure, some programs lend themselves to an allocation-based formula, such as the LOFs, but we also want to make sure that we don't penalize institutions that have greater potential to grow. So we need maybe to look at some flexibility there and having maybe a mix of models. And again, here we're soliciting the inputs from the community in that this is not something that we would do unilaterally. We would want to consult with the community, but we do have some ideas. Finally, does this strategic research plan apply to the current round of applications? Well, we will. Obviously, and this is a question we also had yesterday, because we are in a LEFNIF competition. Obviously, there are some new elements here, but some are not that new. The emphasis, you may have heard them for the first time, but they've always been there. If you look at the documentation, the guidelines of CFI, the partnerships between the interinstitutional collaboration is something that CFI has always fostered and promoted. And so that certainly will be part of some of the activities that we want to continue to foster, even in the new round, the current round of the current competition for the Leading Edge Fund and New Initiative Fund. But some of the other elements obviously would have to wait until we have, may have to wait until we have secured additional funding. In that regards, I think I should mention that obviously we are in a very tight fiscal situation in Canada, as we all know. There are some positive indicators. However, it is not, for many of our stakeholders, the provinces and the federal government, this is a very, very difficult time. So we're hoping for and we are certainly trying to represent that to the various stakeholders, both the federal government as well as the provinces. We're coming to the end of our allocated time. I want to thank you very much for your attention. I'm sure that this has probably also generated a lot more questions. What I would like to do is to encourage you to send us your feedback at strategic roadmap comments at innovation.ca. Comments on the current strategic, on what you've heard today and or what's in the document, or if you have any other comments and or suggestions on that would be beneficial to us, to CFI, please do not hesitate to send us an email. You can either send it directly to that email address or to myself, gilles.patry@innovation.ca. Again, many thanks for your attention, and I'm looking forward to receiving and reading your feedback. Thank you very much.